The rumblings were out there, and now it is official. The Chargers will be playing internationally in 2025 in Week 1 in Brazil.
You are Locked On Chargers, your daily podcast on the Los Angeles Chargers. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
What is up, and welcome into the Locked On Chargers podcast. I'm your host, Daniel Wade, joined as always by my co-host, David Drogemeyer, and we've been covering the Chargers now for 9 seasons together, but this is our 7th year as the host of the Locked On Chargers podcast, bringing you your team every day. Thank you to the everydayers out there for making us your first listen. And to make sure that you never miss the show, go subscribe or follow for free on the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listen wherever you get your podcast from. David, what do we got today?
Jim Harbaugh, Justin Herbert, Ladd McConkey, Derwin James, the stars of the Chargers are taking it international to Brazil. They get to start the season on the world stage and show everybody what kind of superstars they have with the Bolts. Really excited for that. And we got to talk about some tight ends, some options that could be available in free agency. Would you rather take one in the draft, or do you want to trade for one like Kyle Pitts? And definitely got to go get that center of the future, Drew Dalman. Step right up.
We know how much the Chargers have missed Corey Linsley at the center position. And if you're looking in free agency, there's really only one guy that solves your issues on a long-term basis, and that is Drew Dalman, who I'm excited to talk about today. But we do have to talk about the news of the day first, because we did find out officially now that the Chargers will be playing in Brazil. The NFL announced on Wednesday that the Chargers will be opening their season in Brazil Week 1, September 5th in São Paulo at the Arena Corinthians. And that's exciting, David. It's exciting to get the big stage to start off the season the first weekend, just like the Eagles and the Eagles and the Packers did in Week 1 this year. And guess what? The winner of the game in Brazil wins the Super Bowl 100% of the time, according to my numbers. But it is exciting. There's some pros and some cons to it. But I think to kind of have the chance Week 1 on the global stage, not just to build your own fan base and, cater to the fans that you have internationally and specifically in Brazil, but also to platform how much better you are from the season before, right? And I think they're probably going to get a good opponent to do that. And I think with this game, there is a lot of excitement around it.
There really is. And the NFL is not going to just pick any team to put on the world stage. They're not just going to pick the Browns, or they're not going to pick the Jets.
Jaguars. Yeah.
They're not going to pick the Jaguars. They're going to pick a team that's exciting, that plays a brand of football that you want to watch, that wins, that was just in the playoffs. Obviously, the Chargers definitely fit that billing. So I'm very excited to see it. Obviously, I hope this time the field is in much better condition than it was when the Eagles and Packers played. But this is a big thing. I know it's a little, unfortunate for, the home fans who lose a home game. And I know that's never ideal. But I see this as a way of growing the Chargers fan base and getting more fans from around the world.
Yeah, absolutely. I feel for the season ticket holders, like you talked about. I mean, it does hurt the Chargers in the sense that they are losing a home game. Now with 17 games, you're alternating how many home games you get per season. The Chargers had 8 last year, and basically they'll have 8 this year. I would say it's good news that there are going to be a lot of teams playing internationally this year. Not all of them get to play in Week 1, where you have a built-in bye week right before that, and you're coming off of, you should be fully healthy, which is great. The other part of it is you're playing on a Friday night, which means you get an additional 2 days of rest after that before you have to play your next game at least. So I think all of those things play into the Chargers' favor. Now, we saw the field conditions last year, and you have to hope that they learned from that, because obviously with a game like this, you wonder, why do they do this? And it always comes down to the same thing. It's for money, right?
Of course.
Hopefully they field a better product this time around, because you kind of always have to wonder whether or not they really care about that kind of stuff, and we'll find out that first game. But the second question is, who are they going to play, right? Yeah. And I think when you're looking at the teams they could play this year, I don't think it'll be a divisional game, so I would rule that out. The Steelers are going to be playing in Dublin this year. The Colts are playing in Germany, so I'd rule those teams out too. I'd also rule out the bad teams. The teams that make the most sense are the Texans or the Commanders. Obviously, the Texans just blew out the Chargers in the playoffs, so maybe they're not trying to rematch that. Maybe they are. But it seems like the one that most likely would tickle the NFL's fancy the most would be the Commanders. Daniels versus Herbert to open up the season. I think that would be the best matchup and an exciting matchup as far as the teams that realistically could be that team.
Yeah, I mean, hey, two Super Bowl teams, two teams from each conference, two really young and exciting quarterbacks, and two teams that look like they're really ascending. They're really heading in the right direction. So, yeah, this is definitely the type of game, the type of product that the NFL wants to put on the world stage to try to grow the game of football.
Absolutely. And I mean, I just remember, LeBron last year tweeting during the game, man, this field sucks. Saquon Barkley loses 5 yards on the first play from scrimmage. And also, the thing you worry most about, Jordan Love got hurt at the end of that game on that field. But we still have more that we want to get into today. And since we had this news, we did want to fill it in with some Chargers mailbag questions, including this one who's from Ricardo from Brazil. I listen to the podcast every day, and I'm excited about the Chargers opening the season here. I hope I can buy a ticket. What can we expect from the defense in Jesse Minter's second year? I understand one advantage was having several members who played well in the secondary, but none of them, with the exception of James, have the appearance of being a superstar. Do you think this logic will continue in the construction of the roster for next season? So, David, a lot to unpack there, and obviously, to a certain extent, we'll need to see what this defense looks like, because, hey, you lose a Poona Ford and a Khalil Mack and don't maybe make all these additions to it, it'll be pretty questionable about what that unit is going to be able to produce. You could throw Elijah Molden in there as well, because he wasn't a star, but he was really, really good on the back end of this defense. And I don't necessarily think the Chargers don't want stars, right? In the secondary, I think Derwin James just happens to be the only one there right now. Tarheeb still a guy that we both love a lot. Maybe he can turn into that. You have other players on the defense, maybe Deion Henley, right? We'll see if you can bring back a star like Khalil Mack. But I do think there is something to getting guys that fit. Getting guys that you think will work well in the secondary, maybe more than going after star players. But we haven't actually seen GM Joe Ortiz have the flexibility to go after a star cornerback in free agency or spend premium resources on that. So I guess we could find out pretty soon here if the Chargers feel like they need another star in that secondary next to Derwin James.
Well, they are probably going to be losing a couple of corners. I mean, Christian Fulton, Asante Samuel Jr., guys that, very well could be gone in free agency and looking for other teams. And yes, the Chargers have an abundance of money, and they just put out the salary cap projections where it could be over $280 million for the salary cap. So it could be even more money for the Chargers to be able to utilize. And yeah, I'm excited to see it. I'm excited to see what Joe Ortiz is going to be able to do with all of those resources after doing so well with such limited resources. Now it's almost an even bigger challenge to see how he's going to allocate the resources that he has now that he's not so cash strapped.
And I think if you're the Chargers and you have the history of kind of striking out in recent memory on these big time free agents, it can be a little bit scary. And you don't want J.C. Jackson walking through those doors, but you do have two cheap corners who you just spent 5th round picks on in Cam Hart and Tarheeb still that are a great foundation to where if you have to pay a top corner, for 3 years, that only one of those 3 spots that you're using consistently, the nickel and the 2 outside corners, you're not going to be paying very much collectively for that group. So I'd understand if they want to go add a veteran, it'll just be about how much they spend on that veteran. And I think the thing at safety is you have Alohi Gilman, and maybe his status on this team is in question a little bit. We'll see, because they really have no depth there. It's basically just Derwin James and Alohi Gilman right now.
Yeah.
We'll see. That's a position that feels like it has to be addressed. Will they draft a young guy to go behind them? Can they bring back Elijah Molden? Those are very big question marks on this defense going into 2025. But what I will say is this. When it comes to Jesse Minter and what my expectations are for his second year, it isn't that they're going to be a top 5 scoring defense. We'll see. Maybe, I'll feel good about this defense at some point. It's going to be a really tough schedule with, I believe, 9 playoff teams on their schedule from last season. I expect Jesse Minter to get more out of the sum of its parts. I expect him to play to his players' strengths. And that was one of the things we talked to Tony Jefferson about, right? Like, a lot of coaches say they're going to play to your strengths, but this guy actually does it. And I think you can see it not just last year with the Chargers, but you saw it in his last year at Michigan too, where they didn't have highly touted edge rushers. What they did have was a super dominant interior, and they built their defense off of that and some good corners. Last year, they didn't have dominant interior guys, right? It was a much different team than what their strengths were when he was at Michigan, and they still found a way to have the top defense in the league. So putting numbers on it, I'm not ready to do yet, but I do expect for Jesse Minter to get the most out of the players out there. And I think there was a lot of guys who really stepped up their game either or returned to great form last year with Jesse Minter leading the way. But we still have more to get into today because we do have some Chargers mailbag questions, including maybe if the Chargers could attack tight end in free agency as opposed to the draft, or maybe they just go and try to trade for Kyle Pitts. We're getting into all that and more on today's Locked On Chargers podcast. This is a message from sponsor Intuit TurboTax. Taxes are waiting and wondering and worrying if you're going to get any money back, and then waiting and wondering and worrying some more. Now Taxes is matching with a TurboTax expert who can do your taxes as soon as today. An expert who gives your taxes their undivided attention as they work on your return, while you get real-time updates on their progress so you can focus on your day. An expert who will find you every deduction possible and file every form, every investment, everything with 100% accuracy. Also, you can get the most money back guaranteed. No waiting, no wondering, no worries. Now this is Taxes. Get an expert now on TurboTax.com. Only available with TurboTax Live full service. Real-time updates only in the iOS mobile app. See guaranteed details at TurboTax.com/guarantees. David, well, I do want to get into some mailbag questions here about specifically the tight end position before we talk about a center the Chargers should be heavily pursuing in free agency. And this is a question that we have from Paul Koo, who's asking, do the Chargers just sign a tight end like a Juwan Johnson or a Mike Gesicki instead of drafting a tight end? Tyler Warren and Colson Loveland probably not going to be there at 22. There's a good chance you're right, at least about the two top guys and potentially not having a chance at either of those guys unless you're trying to trade up for one maybe. But we haven't really talked very much at all about the tight ends in this free agency class. And I think if you are looking to add a tight end, I don't think it's a bad idea at all. And I think these are probably the two guys you would look at and say, hey, these are options where, hey, you don't have to go into the draft, feel like you need it. It's a huge kind of glaring issue, like it kind of does right now if you only have Will Dissly. Maybe you go and sign a veteran tight end like one of these guys, Juwan Johnson. Makes sense a lot to me specifically because it is Justin Herbert's former teammate. There are ties to the coaching staff as well. And he's been putting up decent numbers with a pretty bad quarterback situation in New Orleans. David, what would you think of the Chargers potentially going after a veteran tight end?
Yeah, I mean, I could see it. I mean, obviously the profile of the veteran tight end that I'm looking for is more of the pass catching tight end. I mean, I think they have the run blocking tight end figured out, and they can probably put Will Dissly more into his slot, which, I mean, hey, he did fantastic with the opportunities that he got, but I think we can all safely assume that he was probably a little bit overextended and a little bit out of position because of necessity. I mean, he did a great job with the opportunities presented, but Agreed. If you bring in a more pass catching centric threat and allow him to go do what he does best a little bit more, obviously mixing that in to keep things, confusing for play action purposes. But yeah, looking at these guys, Mike Gesicki last year, 17 games, 65 receptions, 665 yards and 2 touchdowns, catching passes from Joe Burrow over there with the Bengals. And, he's had some pretty solid production in his career, 3 seasons over 650 receiving yards and 3 seasons of at least 5+ touchdowns as well. He's 30 years old, so he's probably still got a couple of good seasons left in that body. And for Juwan Johnson, he's only 28, has all 5 seasons with the New Orleans Saints, coming off a pretty good season as well, catching passes from a couple of quarterbacks that I don't think any team really wants to feature. 50 receptions, 548 yards, 11 yards per reception there. So pretty, and he has a couple of seasons of 500+ receiving yards. So both solid options. I think I still would probably lean more towards getting my option in the draft. But if they went with one of these guys on a more short-term deal, I wouldn't hate it.
Yeah, and I think that the point of this is just like, okay, if you're not going to get those top 2 guys, who are you going to get? Because that is really where you're banking on all of your tight end improvement to come from, unless you find somebody else in free agency too, right? And that is a little bit risky to be kind of assuming you're going to land a big-time weapon or an impact player at the tight end position in the draft, sitting where you're at 22 with potentially those guys not being there. And yeah, if one of them falls to you at 22 and you jump on that, that's great. And you feel like you can get an instant impact player. And the nice thing is, there's not just 2 tight ends to feel good about in this draft class, and there's potential to get guys in the 2nd and 3rd round that could help them this season as well. But tight ends are kind of sketchy in the draft. There's a reason why not a lot of tight ends really have worked out in the 1st round. Brock Bowers being the exception, you guys like TJ Hawkinson being the exception, but there's a lot of whiffs in there as well. The thing I like about Juwan Johnson specifically, I believe it was Tyler Schoon from Guilty as Charged who said also he played at Penn State with the Chargers assistant wide receiver coach and quality control coach, Jeff Carpenter. So you have some ties there as well. This season, with no Derek Carr for 7 games, he put up that 50 catch, 548 yard performance, but also a great red zone threat. 18 touchdowns over the last 4 years, and per PFF, also has the 5th highest average depth of target, which means kind of a downfield guy, which is not what Will Dissly's game is at all. Also, another part I loved, 66.7 contested catch percentage, which ranks 4th amongst tight ends with 10 plus contested targets in 2024. Chargers were not nearly as good in the red zone as they should have been last year. Another part of it, only a 4.5% drop rate, which you'll take that.
That's
pretty
great.
solid, reliable hands, and a guy that has some chemistry with Justin Herbert from his season in Oregon, and also as a former kind of wide receiver converted to tight end, isn't going to bring you much in the running game, but why not be able to kind of fill that Hayden Hurst role if that's what you want, because that's what they brought him in for, and it just kind of failed. Mike Gesicki, the same thing. You're bringing him in to be a pass catcher, to give yourself a good blocking tight end and a pass catching option, but neither of these guys precludes you from not only spending a pick on a tight end, but potentially spending a day 1 or 2 pick on a tight end. It just means that you won't be as desperate to go get it. What I like about Mike Gesicki, 3% drop rate last year, only 2 drops, and had, was 8th in the NFL in receiving, with receptions amongst tight ends, 10th in receiving yards amongst tight ends, and over a 50% contested catch percentage over the last 2 seasons. So isn't going to help you as a blocker. It's going to help you more in the red zone, gives you a reliable set of hands, a wide catch radius, both of these guys, and just someone who's done it a little bit before, so that you're not just having to fully focus or fully use Will Dissly in a role, like you said, that might have been a little bit too big for him last season. But maybe they have is a different route. Maybe it's not free agency. Maybe it's not the draft where the Chargers fill their tight end position. Athir potentially has another option.
Daniel, David, this is Athir. Let's talk about potential tight end situations. Would you trade for Kyle Pitts, giving up a 4th round this year only and a 3rd round next year, possibly based on the projection, or would you trade up to get a tight end, or hope he will be there at 22 close to Ruffalo? Which options you going with? Thank you. Love you. David, cannot wait.
This is interesting because it does present another option. And I think the big thing is, okay, do you want Kyle Pitts at this point? I mean, I wouldn't send a 3rd and a 4th round pick for him. I'm not sending a day 2 pick and an additional 4th round pick for him, even though I understand the potential. But potential is just potential to me, David. And at a certain point, like, maybe Kyle Pitts just isn't really that good, or isn't kind of that guy. So, I think if you're sending a mid-round pick for someone to try to fill that position, it is on the last year of his contract. Maybe that, feels better than the other options you have if you can't get one of those guys at 22. The only guy I'm trading up for is maybe a couple of spots for Tyler Warren. I think it has a lot to do with how much I have to give up and how far I'm moving up. I don't think I'm moving up at all into the top 10. I don't even know if I'm willing to move up into the top 15. But if that guy drops down and you have a chance to get him for something that feels reasonable, I'm going to trust the front office to do it. But staying at 22 and just taking the best player there, I don't think is a bad idea either.
No, it's definitely not. I know that the tight end position is something that the Chargers absolutely need to address. Like it is a focus. It honestly has been for the last couple of years. And I know they brought in Will Dissly, but that's not solving the main pain point of what we're trying to give Justin Herbert, which is another pass catching tight end. I want somebody who can be the next Hunter Henry for him, that next, security blanket in the middle of the offense. Now, looking at Kyle Pitts, obviously he does have 1,000-yard receiving season that put up one of the best rookie seasons in NFL history for a tight end, which, was fantastic. But the 2 seasons, after that, not so much. Obviously, the quarterback position has been a little bit unsteady there. And, he does have a couple of seasons over 600 yards receiving. I'm definitely not doing multiple picks for Kyle Pitts, but if it's, a 4th, maybe I could probably be talked into it probably, but you have to consider he's on his 5th-year option, which you're going to be paying him $10.8 million. The good thing is Kyle Pitts is only 24 years old, so he's still very, very young. So you'd have to be, thinking about that upside and also what the potential would be with pairing him with a much more substantial quarterback like Justin Herbert and what that relationship could bring to both of these players.
Yeah, and the argument for Kyle Pitts is just, hey, he had Matt Ryan for one season, and for that one season, he balled out, and ever since, he hasn't had a great quarterback, and he hasn't.
Yeah.
But it does feel like, okay, it is also, though, multiple offenses since then, multiple offensive coordinators since then. It doesn't feel like any of them have been able to figure out how to get him to produce consistently. He's a young, super athletic tight end who has a ton of potential. I just don't know how much. I don't think I'd be willing to spend what it would take to get him, because I also don't know why the Falcons would not just keep him. I mean,
Yeah.
and also, if the trade has to come with a new deal, what do you pay this dude? He'd be really, really hard to pay based on what the production
that's
is
a weird
from
one.
it. And it's been a long time since his rookie season when he put up that 1,000-yard year. But I don't think it's a terrible idea, and I think if you're trying to add weapons to this team, you have to exhaust all avenues of trying to improve it. But I think another place they need to improve it, obviously, is at the center position, which is at the center of the Chargers' issues as far as the interior of the offensive
intended.
line and their downfall last season. And there's one guy, if the Chargers really want to be committed to improving that spot on a longer term basis, that they need to try to go get, and that is Drew Dalman. So we're going to talk about that and a potential veteran bargain guy they could have as a bridge center to get them, a younger guy developed underneath them, and more in today's Locked On Chargers podcast. First, though, I need to tell you guys about FanDuel, because whether it's at tip-off or whether you're trying to get in on the fourth quarter action, FanDuel is America's #1 sportsbook, and you can place live bets throughout the game with FanDuel, so you can always stay in the action. And if you're looking for a bigger payout, you can even combine your live bets into a same-game parlay. I obviously love a good same-game parlay and did many when I could this year, but I love using FanDuel's live betting feature because it always keeps every game exciting. And the most exciting thing tonight, and you know what it is, USA, Canada, no Quinn Hughes for the Americans, which is a big loss for them. Was hoping he'd be able to play. It's even money, -110 for each team. And I'm repping the red, white, and blue, taking it home tonight, beating Canada for the second time after not beating them since 1996. And right now, new FanDuel customers can get $150 in bonus bets if your first $5 bet wins. Just visit FanDuel.com to join today. That's FanDuel.com for your shot at $150 in bonus bets. Make every moment more with FanDuel, the official sports betting partner of the NBA. All right, David, well, let's get into more here that we wanted to get to today, because we talked about the guard position yesterday, and it is a loaded guard class where the Chargers have to come away from free agency with a guard. But one guard doesn't feel like enough, and it feels like the Chargers have to upgrade their center position. They have to upgrade at least 2 out of 3 of those interior offensive line spots. And there's one guy that sticks out amongst, above all of the rest of the guys in free agency that the Chargers need to make a run at this year. But thank you, as always, for making us your first listen. We appreciate the everydayers out there. If you need a second listen, make sure to check out the new slate at Locked On NFL, where they have 2 shows a day to keep you up to date with everything going on around the league, with my guy Tyler, the Madman, Roland, and Tony Wiggins in the barbershop on YouTube and wherever you get your podcast from. David, we talked about the top guys yesterday at the guard position, Trey Smith, and then a lot of really, really good options that might not cost as much. At the center position, there's one guy really, if you're looking at this class and the guys that would make a lot of sense for the Chargers, that you would, I think, feel really worth the investment, and that is Drew Dalman, the Falcons center. And why would they want to let him get away? They wouldn't, and they probably don't, but they're also $11.5 million over the salary cap, and their cap is pretty much a mess right now, at least as far as where the projection's at. This guy, David, as far as free agent centers, if you're going to get one, this is the one you want.
This is a guy who is in the prime of his career. He's 26 years old, and we've seen what the power of a really good center does to your offensive line and to the guards that are on each side of them. It is a true force multiplier. When you look at Drew Dalman, 6'3", 300 pounds, had a 78.8 overall grade. He is a better run blocker than a pass blocker, but still a pretty good pass blocker as well. Only 4 sacks allowed and over 1,285 snaps, 70 pressures in his career. So Drew Dalman is a beast. He's a great player. I think this is a guy that is going to cost some money for sure. 4 years, looking at like $11.5 million per season, according to the projections. But I am definitely of the mind of getting a guy that you can plug and play on your offensive line. I mean, I want 2 of those guys, preferably, so that I can feel good that my superstar quarterback, Justin Herbert, is not getting beat up all game, and then we can open up holes for our running back so we can have that running game that we were promised in year one.
Absolutely. And I mean, you look at it in last season, even though he didn't play the whole season, 259 pass blocking snaps and only 7 pressures he allowed. You'll take that every single day of the week. And you'd have to think that Greg Roman would be more interested or be an easier sell for him because he is a more dominant run blocker than he is a pass blocker, but has been one of the more dominant run blockers at the position over the last couple of seasons. And if you want someone to start and play well for you and give you a giant upgrade this season, this is a guy you could go with, and you wouldn't have to feel like you need to find the center of the future in this draft class, and you could wait for maybe a better center draft class, or, you know, take somebody later on that you maybe not be as sure about, but someone that could develop into something. If you don't get a free agent and you can't land, you know, a good free agent like a Drew Dalman, now you feel like you have to get an improvement in the draft class. And I don't know if there's a center in this draft class that's a no doubt, you know, for sure prospect where you're like, okay, well, we might have to reach for him a little bit, but at least we solved that position. The Chargers, before Corey Linsley, were a mess at the center position pretty much since Nick Hardwick. And they haven't had anything close to, I mean, it's only been a couple of years now, but ever since Corey Linsley's been out, it's been a big issue. Bradley Bozeman was kind of a stopgap option. They've said they wanted to bring him back. We've said before, as a depth piece, maybe. As a starter, this guy would bring you, you know, as a 28-year-old, a guy that for the next 4 years, you feel like, hey, he's in his prime. You're getting strong play out of that position going forward, and you don't have to worry about that for a little while, which would be great. And $11.5 million, especially when you're seeing the top of the guard market at $20+ million, doesn't feel nearly that bad at all. I mean, this, I think, is less than what Corey Linsley got on his contract. Not the same level of center as Corey Linsley, but he is easily the best option, and you might have to overpay a little bit for that. Now, there's only one really good center, and that's probably going to drive up the price. I wouldn't be surprised if it's a little bit more than that, but there is also a chance that somebody else is willing to outbid the Chargers because a lot of teams need better offensive linemen. And there is a contingency plan here in the free agency class. Not someone that's going to fill that position for you for the next 5 seasons, but David, there is Ryan Kelly, who's a guy that I know a lot of Chargers fans have looked at and said, hey, maybe that's the guy that can help you improve this season. 32 years old, a projection of 2 years, $9 million per season, so a little bit more reasonable, a shorter term contract. And this, to me, David, represents a perfect aging veteran that can bridge the gap. You take a Ryan Kelly on a short-term contract, you draft your center of the future, hopefully this year, and use a mid-round pick on one of them. And that, I think, is, hey, a good contingency plan to make sure while he's healthy, you're getting an upgrade at the center position while also trying to set up the future.
Yeah, according to PFF, though, you might have to convince him not to retire because it says that he's been mulling retirement. Obviously, he's dealt with some injuries. He only played 10 games this season due to injury. So, you know, if you're able to convince him that, you know, you have a plan and that the team is going to compete and that, you know, they are going to win football games and compete for a championship, then yeah, Ryan Kelly is a good option. 9 seasons, a seasoned veteran, 6'4", 307 pounds. In 2024, he was very good. 601 snaps, only 1 sack, and 11 pressures allowed with only 1 penalty. That is fantastic work right there.
That checks out. Yeah.
It definitely does. So if you're going to spend the money and you're going to get a plug-and-play guy that, you know, you feel really good about putting in the middle of your offensive line, a veteran that's been there and done that and played at an extremely high level, then, yeah, I think you could do a whole lot worse than Ryan Kelly.
You could, because, I mean, he's still playing at an extremely high level, and the only real thing is how long can he keep it up. And this, on the kind of the opposite of Drew Dalman, where he is a much more of a pass protector at his current age than he is a run blocker, even though he still has enough gas as far as a run blocker goes. And your number one priority should be protecting Justin Herbert and fixing what kind of foiled you too many times last season. This is a dude who had the 5th highest pass blocking grade in the NFL last year, and you mentioned 1 sack, 11 pressures in 10 games last year. 2023 was even better. 1 sack and 7 pressures in 14 games.
That's
now,
awesome.
That's not 17 games, but my God, a pressure every 2 games is what he was allowing. Can you imagine that in front of Justin Herbert? That is crazy to think about. Also a guy that has a ton of experience, right? The Chargers had so many protection issues last season that it was crazy. This is a dude who has been noted, you know, as someone who's very experienced, has worked with Andrew Luck in the past as his quarterback, who can really help, I think, in that regard, as far as setting up pass protections, identifying blitzes, and potentially even raising, you know, the young guys around him like a Zion Johnson and whoever they fill that right guard spot with, that can help elevate those players around him even at his age while he's on the field. The biggest red flag is obviously the health, and he got knee surgery last year and still came back and finished the last 3 games for the Colts. Hey, I wouldn't blame him for not wanting to go back to what has kind of been and turned into a messy situation in Indianapolis. If you can talk him in to come to the Chargers, if you strike out on potentially a better option or a more long-term option than Drew Dalman, Ryan Kelly, even at his age, the bar is low. But this could be a huge, huge improvement for them at the center position as far as trying to protect Justin Herbert better than you did last year, where your lack of protection and your lack of kind of supporting cast got him embarrassed on the biggest stage of the year.
Yeah.
So that's what has to be the priority. And signing one of these 2 guys would at least get you a lot closer to having a legitimate offensive line with legitimate protection in front of your star quarterback for the first time in his entire career. But that's going to wrap things up for today's show. Make sure you guys are back here tomorrow because we have special guests on the show because we are talking with the Chargers Unleashed boys. Obviously, we have Dan W., Dan Wolkenstein, and Jake Hefner coming on the show. We did one with them last year, and it was a ton of fun. Might even be a 2-parter because I know when the 4 of us get together, there's a lot of talking, and it might run over one show because we are supposed to be close to 30 minutes. But super excited to have them on. It's always so much fun. So make sure you guys are back here tomorrow by subscribing or following for free in the Locked On Chargers YouTube channel and listening wherever you get your podcast from, as well as finding us every day on all of our social media. You can find us on Twitter at LockedOnLAC, on Instagram at Locked On Chargers, and our Locked On Chargers Facebook page. Me and David will be blasting it to all of our socials as well. For me at Dan Talk Sports on Twitter and David at Dro Talk SD. But thank you guys for checking out today's show. Make sure you guys are back here for the crossover event of the offseason, Locked On Chargers, Chargers Unleashed. But until then, guys, take it easy and go Bolts.